Hey guys, welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. This is a place where, as you know, we question everything. So, if you're just joining us, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. You can also support this stream with super chats or super stickers if you like the conversation that we're talking about. So, today we're going to be talking about from redlining to racelining. And the inspiration for this topic today came from Steve's article. Um, when I read that article, I saw the word race lining being used for the first time, and I thought it was a very interesting play of words. And I was like, yes, this this is something good. This is something interesting, and I think it may just become common stay. It may just become something that people use from time to time. They just become part of the common language and common lingo. So, as Steve, how
Yes,
did you come about that term? Is it an original term? Did you see it somewhere or what?
it is a completely original term from what I can tell. When I came up with it, I was like, you know what? I've never heard that before, so I'm going to check Google and see if it's ever been used before. And the only time I can see race lining being used is in like race driving terms and terminology. So I've never heard it used in this sense, and it just fits. It makes sense. And it very clearly describes what is going on from my argument.
Okay. So, what exactly is um what exactly is race lining? You want to tell us what it is?
Yeah, so race lining is the behavior between intraracial groups. Well, I should say, yeah, in intraracial groups. So, white on white, or I should say, racialized white, and racialized black on racialized black. It's the kind of it's the way that the myth of racism continues to be used as a way of oppressing those within our own groups, and it it manifests itself in a way that allows us to restrict or even balkanize the people within our own supposed, quote unquote, racial groups. Um, it's used to quiet people who disseminate from, an opinion. Um, you've heard the terminology, you speak. Why are you talking like white people? This is used to discriminate, oppress, even harass people of the same racial background as you simply because you don't agree with what they're saying. So it's the kind of racism that happens within racial groups of the same racial group.
Okay. So, just like saying, um, because you are not racialized as black, you can't speak on black issues, you can't understand black issues, or because you're not racialized as white, you can't speak on white issues. Is something of that sort.
Well, it's if you're racialized as black and you're speaking to other racialized black folk about a very specific racialized black subject, and you have a dissenting opinion from the majority, what will quite honestly frequently happen, and numerous people have heard this happen, so it's no mystery to people. But it's where you would, speak up against what the majority is saying, and in return, in response, they will tell you that you are not black enough, you are a white supremacist mouthpiece, you are any number of euphemisms that you want to use, and it's just a way of quieting the dissenting speech of people within your own racial groups.
So, are you saying this is unique to black people? Is that what you're saying?
No, everybody does it. Even within racialized white groups, you still have the same problem where we'll be like, we see these, little gangster wannabes, and we'll say, stop acting black. You know what I mean? And so these are ways of committing racial harm within our own racial groups. So,
Hmm. Okay. So if I got that, what you just said about, it's not so much a race thing as much as it's an ideological thing. If Steve has gone out. All right. So let me add him back.
All right, I'm back.
Yeah. So I was just saying, so this term is not so much a race thing as much as it's an ideological thing, in the sense that even if you are racialized as a certain group, if you do not follow a certain ideology which sort of a majority of that group upholds, then you could be stripped of your sort of race and be othered by your own race. Is that
Yeah,
is that correct?
that's one way of taking it. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's more an ideological. So this just brings me back to the point of saying that this whole race business is really not this is really not substantive, because
Well,
if
it's
someone
harmful
can,
everywhere you go. It's harmful everywhere you go.
yeah.
No matter
mm,
how you use it, it ends up being harmful.
mm. But do we see this, is this as pernicious as, or as harmful as the case of redlining ever was? How do you see this playing in everyday interactions, day-to-day interactions, even in terms of policy, in terms
Right.
of government function and all that?
Well, if you look at it from the perspective of Leonard Harris and necrobeing, which I referred to in the article, it's this form of necrobeing, or necrodeath, I should say. And necrodeath, the best way to explain necrodeath is that necrodeath is a way of killing the human part of another human being. Now this can actualize into real death or living death, and it's meant to literally otherize someone to the point um, uh, where their voice is silenced. You Trying to remember the terminology that Mr. Harris actually used, but basically there's multiple different ways of creating necro death, and one of those is by subjugation, and this is that form of necro being, of subjugation. You are killing the being in the world that represents the voice of that individual in the real world.
Okay. So policy, talk about policy. How does race lining affect policy?
That one is one that I have a difficult time with because I haven't gone that deep into it. I mean, this was the first instance and the first way that I thought about it being used. But you could, reasonably, you could argue that any kind of policy that infantilizes a racial group would be considered race lining that group. So rather than empowering it, it tends to infantilize. A system that you could reasonably argue is race lining is affirmative action. It would be one example of that. However, I couldn't argue from a strong position, since I just literally just thought of that, and I would have to think much more of it. But it's a lot of people have considered. I personally, for one, support affirmative action. However, you could argue it from the position where it's the soft bigotry of low expectations, whereas we're, instead of acknowledging people of color and their success and their hard work, we are only rewarding them for the color of their skin and not that hard work. However, when affirmative action was created, I firmly believe that it was needed. It was necessary. We needed to build a bridge between poverty, racial disparity, and other problems, and build that bridge forward into the future so that we had more opportunities for people of color, specifically racialized Black individuals, that were being held back because of redlining and other issues, especially educational issues. Poor education, poor economics, because a lot of the times racialized Black individuals were left out of entire swaths of economic growth. And there's even some argument by Thomas Sowell where he actually argued that minimum wage itself was a way of suppressing racialized Black people and oppressing racialized Black people from the position where we took their ability to negotiate their wage away from them. And he exampled this as if you've got a white boy, and I'm using his terminology here. If you've got a white boy who the minimum wage, let's say it's just $5. We'll just say $5. It's an easy, nice number. And that's the minimum wage. Well, you've got a choice between a racialized Black person and a racialized white person. And if you are a racist business owner, right, you are first and foremost a capitalist, obviously, but you're also a racist. But instead of giving the opportunity for the racialized Black folk to say, you know what, I'll do that job for $4. Okay. You're a capitalist first and foremost, and you're looking at where you can beat the buck. And what happened is we took that away from them when they instituted minimum wage, right? Because we didn't have other structures there to support the actual, the minimum wage, in the sense that we didn't have the structures there to deal with systemic racism and systemic bigotry. Right. So it actually ended up hurting them. And for a long time, even in the 40s, when they reviewed it, the necessity of it, and actually ended up raising the minimum wage again, the racialized Black unemployment rate never recovered until fairly recently. So there's reasons and arguments where you could actually suggest that racelining has occurred in the past, and that it has had disparaging of outcomes.
Okay. Oh, so now let me push back with what Coach Erica has stated here. She said that I struggle with saying that affirmative action is based off low expectations. See, the reason why I challenge that is because typically the candidate has to still meet the minimum criteria to be considered. Now, this is something that may not have occurred to me, but I think there's some validity to this. I mean, if, for example, there are spots that need to be filled, maybe there are 100 spots that need to be filled, and affirmative action says we're guaranteeing that 20 of those spots go to Black people. Are you saying that they're just saying 20 of those spots go to any Black person, arbitrary Black person? Or is there a minimum standard, a minimum acceptable standard, knowing fully well that, these things are usually a spectrum, you understand? There is no absolute. Once you have, if you have this figure, this is the only figure that anybody can have, you understand? It's a spectrum of, okay, this is the basic requirements that you need to be able to function optimally, or to be able to function reasonably within this setting. So in that case, is it still sort of low expectations if those affirmative action people are still meeting the minimum requirement, which in itself is a standard?
Right. Well, I have to admit, I am not an expert in that field. I'm not an expert in a lot of fields, right? But not having a lot of knowledge. Well, we've talked about this before. It's really difficult to, like, the most difficult 3 words in the English language to say is "I don't know," right? Because we don't like other people thinking that we're stupid or that we're not knowledgeable. But to me, it's more of a way of saying that I'm being honest with you and myself, that I just don't know. As far as affirmative action is concerned, I just don't know enough to argue that perspective. Not to mention, I just thought of it as an example. Most of the reason why I wrote the article was because I saw a lot of bigotry happening within racial groups that I didn't like, and they were using race, which I believe does not exist in nature. It does not exist in science. And so and not to mention that race itself was created by white supremacy. So by doing so, and by committing ourselves to these racist acts, even within our own racial groups, we are continuing to uphold the system of white supremacy, because white supremacy created those constructs for us, and to live within those constructs is still supporting white supremacy. So I'm looking at it from outside the white supremacist construct.
Okay. E, do you want to jump in?
Your mic is kind of breaking up a little bit too there, Charles. It's very staticky.
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Oh, my mic.
Or Steve, can I ask a question real quick? Of you, what do you think about this being an effort to keep classes divided and to keep subclasses divided, to where potentially shady people doing shady shit within our government being coupled with the Soviet attempts at screwing with us back during the Cold War, using our own culture and Hollywood against us? Do you think that this could literally be what we're going through right now, literally be a combination of multiple things just kicking us all at once?
So to some degree, I mean, that's definitely a possibility. I think that's something that we would have to really investigate with a committed eye. But the way that communism kind of uses class distinctions to separate and segregate, and they did it really well to kill. I mean, they killed, what was it, in China it was 100 million people. In the Soviet Union it was 50 million people, roughly. There's some sketchy numbers either way, but what we do know is that they did definitely kill over 100 million people in the 20th century. And they used that by creating othering systems. One of those othering systems was class. The US uses othering systems such as race and class. And even in the Soviet Union, you still had issues with race, because there's a very famous person by the name of, I believe his name was Lovett Ford Whiteman. And he went to Russia to escape the rampant racism that was here in the US. Well, he was fairly close to the Politburo, and he had a dissenting opinion about something. Well, they sent his ass off to the gulag. He died in the gulag. And there was other cases, Stalin was incredibly anti-Semitic. Marx himself was incredibly racist, incredibly homophobic. Why people still support these ideologies, I don't know. But what we do know is that anytime we use a system to segregate, separate, subjugate, it leads to disparaging effects, right? So anytime we try to balkanize groups of people, we end up either killing them or harming them in multiple different ways. And so what I've always been a supporter of, and this is one of the reasons why I love Angel Eduardo, is that we should really be focusing on how we can come together as peoples so that we can solve these issues, rather than continuously creating ways in which to divide ourselves, even within our own racial groups, and within our religious groups. I mean, look at how many ways Catholicism is split apart. Look at how political ideologies split apart. You've got Democratic socialists. You've got just straight out Democrats. You've got Republicans, Tea Party. Like, we legitimately find so many reasons to segregate ourselves that we make it incredibly easy to promote tribalism and the othering of others, so that we can benefit from it, and that we could be anybody, any group that has significant enough power and authority. In this case, in your sublimation is the federal government, right? So the federal government could easily take these constructs, and the Democrats love to use race, and they will continuously reinforce this concept of race, right, which we know does not exist. It's scientifically proven. We know that it does not functionally exist in society, or it does not functionally exist in nature or in science. But we continue to live inside this construct that white supremacy built for us. And Audre Lorde herself said, you cannot destroy the master's house using the master's tools, right? So the idea is looking at these perspectives from a position of the theory of racelessness to be able to look outside of race and actually see what it's actually doing. And it's harmful. It's incredibly harmful, especially when you see people discriminating against people who look like themselves. And you're like, you're just doing the same thing a white supremacist would do. Right? So why are you doing the work for them? And that was the basic premise of the article.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
I'd say
Okay,
it covered about 3/4 of it, but like I was saying, with that question out of the way, here's the other part of it. Why is it that when we're kids, we don't give a damn until literally our history starts talking about, or our history classes start hitting Civil War, and it seems like or at least the schools I went to in the ghetto, it seemed like the teachers were literally teaching it in ways to get the black kids pissed off at the white kids. And then you'd start seeing divides. I mean, up until then, nobody gave a damn that I was half white, half native. I didn't give a crap what color any of them were. We just played together, had fun together.
Well, that's the perniciousness of using race as a separator. Okay, I think I know where you're going with that. But yeah.
I have a question. So now, are we trying to say that there is no utility to groups? Groups exist for a reason in the first place. I mean, those of us here are sort of a group because we have similar proclivities in terms of encouraging free speech. You understand? Letting people have their say. That is a group in itself, and it has its own ideology. So by our standards of saying groups shouldn't exist, or groups are ways of dividing ourselves, aren't we deconstructing our own existence as a group in the first place? So is there no utility in having groups? Isn't it that having a group itself is not the problem, but what the group stands for and what it teaches and what it promotes, the ideas within that group, that becomes the problem?
Right. So yeah, and we've talked about this a couple of times, but groups are fine. We're fine with operating with groups. It's when one group claims supremacy over another group. Now you do have what Karl Popper described, which was intolerance of the intolerant, right? So there has to be some degree by which we can push back against ideas that we believe are intolerant of a healthy society. But the problem is that should never include the destruction of the being, the destruction of the human being in what Leonard Harris would call necro death, right? So we shouldn't try to tell ourselves that we are better than everybody else. And I think that's the mistake that we continuously make. Instead, we should say, I believe that I have a morally and ethically better idea let's sit down and let's talk about why you believe you have a better, morally and ethically better idea than I do. And so that we can begin to have these constructive discussions instead of it being a binary between win or lose, good or bad. This is where nuance comes in, is we need to start looking at conversations in a much more nuanced way and throwing out that old concept of binary good, bad, win, lose, so that we can actually begin to solve problems. But it also takes acts of charity, acts of compassion. You know what I mean? And that's been, the most difficult part of my journey is listening to somebody who has a drastically different perspective than I do, and just shutting up, listening to their feelings, listening to their facts, listening to their voice, really internalizing it, really trying to think about it, and trying to connect with that person on their ground.
Okay. So Mr. Mina said something. Say it's completely normal and acceptable to split into groups and to notice differences between our groups.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Oof. I don't know if somebody's mic is going crazy. Okay, I don't know what that was all about. I'm assuming you're talking about Misty Meaner's comment. It's completely normal and acceptable to split up into groups and to notice differences between groups. Yeah, it's completely fine. It's not that we're separating ourselves into groups. It's the fact that we believe ourselves superior to other groups that I have an issue with. That's the primary. That's the primary pathos that we get to places where we get Hitlers, we get Stalins, we get Pol Pots, Mao Zedongs, right? That's the logos and the pathos to get to those end results. And when we take that away and we say, look, we understand that people are human beings. Everybody's a human being here, and we need to see these people with charity, with humility. We need to see the human within them and their groups, even if they're hell bent on destroying us. We will never conquer this human attribute to commit to war, acts of violence, segregation, subjugation, slavery. This is something that we need to overcome as a human species, is to transcend these ridiculously silly ideas that our differences inherently make us superior. You know what I mean? Like being racialized as white does not give me superpowers. I can't fly. I can't think better than other people of different colors or different cultures, right? I'm no different, fundamentally no different. We have the same number of organs, the same number of teeth, the same number of fingers, generally the same number of brain cells, you know what I mean? And so there's, attributing special abilities, and even in Chloe Valderie's comment, attributing omniscience and omnipotence to a skin color is a ridiculous idea. It's just absolutely ridiculous, right? It's ridiculous to do that and to impart on me more value to my white skin than even I do. I find an odd argument. I find an odd argument in that. So hopefully that answers your question, Misty.
Yeah. So the thumbnail for this conversation today, two females. If you looked at them, they look like they have two different races, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But
yeah.
they're
I mean, you
actually
can
twins.
tell physical differences.
They're actually twins, the same mother and the same father. And they came out that way. So what does that even tell us about race? Because the parents are mixed too. So somehow the kids also, one came out looking like a typical black person and the other came out looking like a typical European. So it just tells us that this thing is, there is no, what race are you going to call them? What race exactly are you going to call them? They're just human beings. You get. But when we're looking at let's move from groups in terms of human beings, in terms of race and all that. Let us look at groups in terms of ideas, in terms of ideologies. Can we say certain ideas are superior to other ideas? Because when we bring in skin color, we're moving into the territory of, oh, we're going white supremacists, we're going supremacist shit. So if we're
Yeah.
looking at it in terms of ideas, can you say this idea is superior to this idea? Is it acceptable to say something like that?
Yeah, I'm been working on a philosophy of ascendancy and descendancy in idea supremacy. And what that looks like is when we take a idea and we can look at it and we can deconstruct it and look at it objectively, right? There's some ideas that appear in every way to be ascendancy ideas, in the sense that we can build upon them, right? We can question them, we can debate them, we can tear them apart, put them back together, we can make them better. And this brings with it the ascendancy principle of idea supremacy. And then on the opposite side of that, you have descendancy principles, which is you have an idea, you're not allowed to question it, you're not allowed to break it down, you're not allowed to debate it. And what happens is the result is it becomes disgustingly simple, and it becomes monochromatic in the sense that you're only given two choices: follow or don't follow, right? Where ascendancy principles, you can choose to follow parts of it, some of it, all of it, or none of it, right? But being able to have the control to be able to do that, and those choices are valid, do not follow or fall in line with descendancy principles, where the idea is so supreme you cannot question it, right? And I believe that those ideas, those descendancy principles of idea supremacy are the ones that are harmful. And if you look at race does have some utility for some people, right? It helps provide them a vehicle to pride and self-confidence and compulsion to do well. But if you're really to look at that and to view that, and Dr. Mason has actually spoken about this before, and as many others have as well, is that if you were to remove the skin color from that, those things are still there. They're still possible for you to attain without the skin color, right? The vehicle is actually you as a human being being able to do the work. If you succeed because of skin color, it wasn't skin color. It was because of you, your brilliance, your ideas, your hard work, your motivation, your merit, right? Those are what actually made it happen, not the skin color, because the skin color is just it's a pigment. It's a gene that turns on more than mine, right? That doesn't produce extra intelligence, right? It's no different than hair color, eye color, eyelash length, beard color. There's nothing there that inherently affect IQ, right? It doesn't affect hard work. So in those senses, I would put race under descendancy principles, because a lot of people feel like you can't question race. I do. I question its utility, because I believe in the human being that is under that skin. I believe in their abilities, their capabilities, their soul, so to speak. And that is what is important to me, the content of the character, really. And so I would definitely put that under the ascendancy side of my, or the descendancy principle side of my philosophy.
Yeah. Now, the thing with human society is, because there's this currently sort of a battle going on in the comment section about superior and inferior and all those things. When you look
Yeah.
at the earliest civilizations, they go back to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Mediterranean regions. You understand? And right now, we can say that European civilization is at the top of what we have as civilization. There was a time the biggest civilization would have been somewhere in China, in Asia, and all that. And definitely, there have been some great civilizations in Africa as well. What that tells me is that there is nothing superior or inferior about any particular group. You know, whatever state of development any group finds themselves is a mix of many factors. Can be a mix of what level of development they are at that point, the challenges they are facing, their interactions with other cultures. You get so in the timeline of human history, which is fluid, who is superior? Is it the person who got it first, or the person who is better now? So is it the Egyptians? Are the Egyptians who figured out a whole lot of astronomy even before the Germanic tribes in the hinterlands of Europe were still barbarians? Are they superior to the Germans? Or are the Germanic tribes today who seem to be at the peak of sort of civilization, are they superior to the Egyptians? So which is it? So life, history, it's fluid. You understand? It goes round. It goes round because we're all humans. And if we are born from the same basic genetic material, then it means that we have the same potential. Now, potential is different from what is actually seen because what influences the output, the final output is also different. There are a whole lot of things that would affect the final output you get.
Yeah.
So
Well,
the point
yeah.
I'm driving at is that using the terms inferior and superior in terms of human being might not be an accurate descriptor of how you express the differences between human beings. Because I agree that human beings are different. I even agree that cultures are different, groups are different. You understand? They have to be different for that classification to make any sense in the first place. Saying someone is a man, there has to be something objectively different between a man and a woman for you to say this is a man or this is a woman. Or say someone is in grade in this grade, there has to be something objectively different from someone to be in this grade and the other person to be in another grade. But the basic thing is that we're all humans and none is superior and none is inferior.
Right. Well, yeah, and you know, the problem comes is when we try to artificially place a value on one's importance over another's, right? So it's you know, I'm still watching the comment section. I find it interesting. You know, pride has nothing to do with superiority. Pride has everything to do with self-confidence of one's ability to overcome one's own adversity, to overcome one's life, all the pebbles and stones that life throws at us, and being able to overcome those. But it should not ever extend past ourselves. And that's why you get white supremacy. That's why you get these ideologies that enforce these concepts of inferiority and superiority. Pride in yourself is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that, so long as it's not you are better than someone else. It's you better than who you were yesterday. And so I hope that clears it up. But you know, it does. I mean, what you're describing here, Charles, is a very interesting aspect of history and the way that we view history. And this kind of speaks to Voice's comment earlier, is that, you know, history shouldn't be taught through, in my opinion, through a lens of agenda or politics. It should really be ungender or degendered, in the sense that we should be looking at it constructively and teach people how to read history constructively, and also reading history from the perspective that the moral systems that they had then are not the same moral systems that we have built from that, right? So we understand that, you know, certain moral and ethical values were just not there 200 years ago, but they are here now, and we have learned from our mistakes in the past. And this is the thing that keeps society moving forward, and we find better ways of doing things, and we find ways to tear down things that are keeping us held back. And to be ignorant of that, or to try and push a any kind of an agenda with that, I find is incredibly disingenuous. Coach
Hello.
Love.
Hi, how are
Hi,
you?
I'm
we're
doing well. How are you
and
doing?
I am doing well. I'm doing well. Thank you for your patience and allowing me to get up here. I hope it is still okay to talk about affirmative action.
Sure, I have no problem with that.
Okay?
You know, just so long as you're aware that I don't have a deep, intimate knowledge of affirmative action and how it functions. I kind of have an idea of it, but it was not where my article was intended to push quite yet. It's still the idea of racelining is still a kind of a new burgeoning, infant based, infant level idea. So I'd have to really research affirmative action to be able to really apply it to that. But I'm perfectly happy having a conversation around that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and in the meantime, Steve, can you tell me where I can find a link to that article so I can skim over it while we chat?
Yeah, if you go to wrongspeak.net, and you'll see a tab. I believe it's just a 3 lines tab, and it'll give you it'll say articles, contributors at the very top. Just look at articles, and then it'll give you a list of genres. Mine is under race and culture. It should be the second or third one.
All right, then I'm going to ask you more details.
Yeah.
That is amazing. And this, I'm going to speak not necessarily to your article, although I have read it and I did really enjoy your article. Really, I'm coming up to just talk about affirmative action, and it is something that is people are quick to point that out as almost as if it's something that is being given to minorities. And then typically they are quick to point it out as it refers to Black people. I want to say, and I also want to just say this. Congratulations on coining the phrase racelining. I think that is a beautiful phrase. I hope it gets popularized and we are one day able to look it up and accredit it to you. So I hope that is.
I hope so too.
I think that would be fabulous.
And thank you.
That would be very.
And by the way, may I say it's wonderful to hear your voice.
Aw, thank you. I've missed you.
I have missed you desperately. I apologize. I've been so busy. I'm starting school next month, and I'm doing taxes, and I'm refinancing my home.
Oh my God.
Like I've got like 8 things that I got to do. Plus I have to study for a test. I'm trying to collect out of math. And so I'm trying to like refamiliarize myself with algebra. And so and statistics, and I'm a little rusty, but that's kind of why I've been so absent lately. I just got so much on my plate right now.
I received that, and I'm not going to take up all the time catching up with Steve. Steve has been so busy, he didn't notice how busy I was. That's how busy he has been. But we will catch up. I promise we will.
Yes.
I wanted to talk about affirmative action in comparison to what I call the good old boys club, and then the who do you know kind of thing. And I would like to use the recent Supreme Court justice as an example. Okay, so this is her experience record. She is a justice on the U.S. Circuit Appeals Court in D.C. She was a judge in the U.S. District Attorney in Columbia. She was the vice chair of. She was a vice chair. She was a public defender. She was on the Supreme Court. The Supreme Circuit Court. So she has a long history of superb experience. Now compare that to most of the members who have passed through the Supreme Court justice nominee process, let alone the ones who have actually become Supreme Court justices. They all pale significantly in compared to her. And so if anything generally happens with the affirmative action process, the person is generally significantly qualified because they don't get to go through the good old boy system and the who do you know system. And what's kind of irritating from a person who always has to meet the criteria is that I always have to meet the criteria when I step into the room, and the other people in the room do not have the do not have the qualifications, or have not had to go through the rigor in which I have had to meet in order to be in that very same room. It's just that they are in the who do you know club, and somehow, some way, they are considered they're considered to have a greater right to be there than I do. And I'm speaking from an I perspective, but then to take that to a larger frame, statistically, that occurs very widely. And then just to take it back to not just my personal experience, just my experience in recruitment in general, because at this point in my career, I have recruited well over 1,000 professionals in medical and in high level positions. And the things that people say to me when they don't realize who I am or what I look like are absolutely amazing. And so they're very comfortable speaking of what their preferences are. And so I'll just tie this back to affirmative action. Affirmative action is generally more fair. When I say fair, I mean they're putting in more qualified people than the good old boy network ever did any day.
Mm-hmm. You know, so I find that the thing really interesting with the Supreme Court nominee, in the sense that you made the argument of her achievements, but I don't think you ever even mentioned her race.
The reason why I didn't mention her race is because we already know that she is a Black woman. And what I'm saying is she would not be a person within the good old boy network. So would she probably be considered if she was not a Black woman in this date and time? No, someone else. If we just use the regular, let's pick somebody kind of thing, she wouldn't be considered. And if we didn't use her race, no, she wouldn't be considered, because they would just pick somebody who they were friends and comfortable with.
Right.
That is what people do, and this is what I know to be true from recruitment period. Is it has nothing to. Sometimes it has nothing to do with race. It has to do with who do you know and who knows you. Okay, but unfortunately, who do you know really does include people of your same race.
Mm-hmm.
People who are in your same social economic area, people who you went to the same school with, people who you go to church with. And typically those things are broken up by race. Who do you golf with is a big one.
Yeah, it is.
Right. So
if I can speak to that really quickly, is I'm agreeing with everything that you're saying. There's no disagreement with me here, because I believe that the reason why I brought up, you didn't mention her race, is because I don't think that we should have to, is because she should get it on the merit of her achievements alone. And that the problem isn't her race. The problem is the good old boys club. That's the problem, right? So instead of focusing like affirmative action on race, we should be focusing on the thing that makes race have to be like a part of the conversation, right? So white supremacy, good old boys club, tradition, all this hokum that we know does not lead to positive outcomes. But when we do look at merit and we look at achievement, from what I can tell, she's going to be a phenomenal justice. Far better than Clarence Thomas was or is, because even Clarence Thomas, let's face it, he didn't have a real stellar history of decisions, right? And this woman has a stellar history. I believe she's going to be phenomenal. I think she's going to be putting in some real intelligent thought into her decisions. And so I completely agree with you in the sense that affirmative action allows us to get people into positions where they should be considered based on their merit and achievements. But yet we're still ignoring the main problem, which is the good old boys club, or in this case, the structure of white supremacy that we're not dealing with because we're still residing within the structure of it.
So who do you know and who knows you is never going to go away. It is
right.
Absolutely never going to go away. And that is the foundation of the good old boys club. Okay. And so if we pushed a button and got rid of race today, it would still be there. It would still be there 100%. So knowing that, how do we fix it? Do I think affirmative action is a true 100% fix? No, I do not. Do I think it's the best one that we have available to us right now? Yes. I also think we would do well to help educate people on what affirmative action actually does and the rigorous criteria that most people have to meet in order to be considered in any particular affirmative action opening. I do, because I think, like you, initially people think that somehow you reach down to the bottom of the barrel to get somebody who's not even qualified in the first place. But what it actually does is pulls up someone who's qualified, who you would have never considered because they were not in your circle of friends, so to speak. That's what it actually does. And as a recruiter, what amazed me is when people would say, oh, I can't find anybody for this position, and the position is sitting at 120 days out. And I would say something, have you advertised in this journal, this magazine, this one? No. But you want to know why they didn't? It's because they never even considered that, and that would open up a whole slew of other qualified candidates, but they happen to be magazines and journals that were atypical to what they would read.
So you actively function outside of the good old boys club in that sense.
Well,
you're actively like trying to break it apart, being like, hey, have you tried looking outside of your group of friends for this position, the best person for this position? Because right now you're acting in what I would say would be a good old boys club, where you're only looking at the people that you know instead of looking at the wide swath of people who have the merit and ability to do the job, right? And so what it sounds like what you're doing is you're opening their eyes to this idea that you can look outside of your own, your own social group, your own good old boys club, and you will find people out there that are amazingly well qualified for the position that you're wanting to fill.
So 100%, absolutely, yes. I think that's one of the things that have made me a top-notch recruiter, and what has kept me to have a low days, what's called, how many days out is this position? That's one of the reasons why I was always able to fill my positions very quickly, is because that's how my mind works and that's how I operate. That said, a consistent pushback that I would get is, well, we don't know them. We don't know them, and I'm not comfortable with them. Well, I just don't know how they think. I don't know. they're not going to be a good fit. I just feel like they're not going to be a good fit, you know.
Yeah.
So I get these intangible worries, and I've certainly lost clients and candidates to that idea, is the preconceived notion of this person's not going to be a good fit. And unfortunately, I think Dr. Mason would say it is based off of culture. But from what I can tell, it is based off of race, because when you look at someone's name and you racialize the person's name, or if I send a picture in and you racialize the person's image, you are believing certain things about them. So although
I had
race
something to say about this, but I want to let you finish. Yeah.
although race doesn't exist in your argument, if I accept that to be true, the idea of race certainly does.
Mm-hmm.
And what a person may be um, because of what their skin tone may look like. And then I'll hear what you have to say, and then I want to talk about the two young ladies that are on the cover today.
Yeah. So I'm gonna echo your opinions here and say that I think that there are ways that we can circumvent these issues of racializing applicants for positions, right? So it would be really nice if we could leave the name off and leave a picture off of the resume and just go based off of, I don't know, a number like social security number, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because a social security number isn't racial.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we can't say that if the first, 3 letters of your your social starts with 851 that you're definitely going to be a racialized black person. We can't do that because that's not how our system functions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you have to have a protected number, but because you can't just go around using your social for everything. But and the thing I find interesting is that someone has, if we're asking for a picture of someone to go along with the resume, we can instantly think, why do you need a picture of that person other than to racialize them? You can either racialize them, you can make an argument from ableism, from race, from even in some terms fat shaming, beauty shaming, any of these different other types of discrimination forms. We can use those once we have a picture, right? So no matter what we do with that picture, we're immediately racializing and discriminating against someone else, period. You know what I mean? And so if we had a way to look at a resume without a name, without a picture, and hire them based off of basically off the merit of their skills and abilities, I think you would have a better system than if we were using names and pictures to do that. And I don't see why we don't do that. I mean, it's more than possible to do that. You know what I mean?
I do. I agree with you, and I understand your perspective. I do want to highlight the reason why I use names and pictures because of the type of recruiting I was doing. It was physician recruiting and C-suite recruiting. So that is why. And then specifically relating to physician recruiting, even if I put their CV out, it's easy to see if they're a foreign medical graduate and what where they went to school, and that is going to cause them to be racialized. But I get your point. There was a big resume study that was done based off of names. So yes, I hear you.
Yeah, because I mean, if they went to Howard, which I believe is an HBCU, you would immediately know that they were racialized as black, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing, if you couple that, because on the thumbnail for this video, you'll see a white person and a black person on there, but they're both biracial. They're both half black, half white. You know what I mean? And so technically the racialized white girl in that picture should be able to go to an HBCU just as much as her sister, who is more racialized as black because of her appearance. So immediately we understand that this argument is absolutely ridiculous, that race is important in these aspects, because they should both, according to race, should both be given the same opportunity to go to an HBCU like Howard. And so the murky waters we get into when we consistently use race in these terms, it almost becomes frustrating, because we're constantly having to go back and be constrained by this idea of race, and then we try to get out of it, but then we're pulled back into it because we keep using the same terminology. We still use the same structures. But I also want to support what you're saying, because I think it's ignorant of us, especially racialized white folk, to not understand that just because race doesn't exist in nature or in science does not mean that disparities due to the idea of race don't persist and exist. They absolutely do. We still have racial disparities in multiple different places, and we need to acknowledge those, and we need to fix and repair those issues. But I think the problem is because we consistently work within the structure of white supremacy's idea of race, it's never going to get fixed.
And I want to talk about that, but if you look in the private chat, Charles would like us to pause for a minute, and then I'll respond to what you're saying.
Absolutely. I'd love to hear Cody.
Oh, hello.
We can't hear you, Cody. Your mic is really muffled.
That'd be different. Okay, let me log off and log back on, and you go ahead, and I'll get back to you.
Okay, I'd really love to hear from you, Cody.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think he'll be back. So, Coach, go ahead.
All right. So, although when I look at the picture, I understand what people are saying, that this person appears to be white, and for me, she doesn't look white. She looks like a light-skinned black woman, and she also looks like a woman who is able to pass. Passing means that a person can seep into white culture even though they are black, and they can receive privileges as if they are white. But for me, this young girl clearly looks like a black woman who's able to pass. However, it is the fact that white people cannot tell she is black is the issue. Black people can tell that she is black. And
So what gives it off for her, for black people? How do you know? How can you tell?
From her hair color to that slight tint in her skin tone, I can see it. But I think I can see it because I've seen it and been taught to observe it my whole life. It's like something I've been trained to see. I have people that I am friends with, and people who are in my family who were passers, and I know what passing does for you, and I know what it is like to pass in the community and then bring those privileges back to your black community. I also know the pain of causing or having to be caused to be separated from your black community, so that people do not find out that you are actually black, or to have to use your black relatives in your household as your servants and treat them as if they're servants, when really this person that you're looking at is their sister. But because you were born light and this person was born a shade darker than you, but yet you want them to be a part of your life and your lifestyle, you have to use them as your servants. So there are a lot of dynamics here. This isn't the first time this has happened in history. It's very common to happen in my family. There are people who are darker than Charles, and there are people who are almost as light as Steve. And this is in the generation in which I was born in. And as a matter of fact, my grandparents' 7 kids are all different shades of black. But that is just something that happens in the black community.
Testing, testing. Can you hear me?
Coach, so yeah, we can hear you. Sorry, one question before Cody comes in. So, Coach, that girl, the light-skinned girl there, she had like red hair and she had very pale skin with freckles and almost blue eyes. How can you tell with all those? How can you tell with all those that she was still passing?
Look at the it's that tint, and it's a specific tint in the skin. And if you look at the texture of her hair, even though she is wearing it straight, I can see that texture in the hair and that specific color in the hair. These are kinds of things that are very common when you are mixed race. When you are mixed race, you just get these very interesting traits about you. And so if you are not accustomed to seeing those things, you might automatically consider that person to be white because somebody with that kind of skin tone appears to be white to you. But if you were raised in knowing subtle differences between skin tones and skin colors, then you can kind of see that person is black. The only thing I can compare it to is this is going to sound silly, but I was watching a documentary, and there were these people. They were in a safari, and there was an expert there who had been trained book wise, and he was a scientist, and he had read all these books and done all these studies. But there was a gentleman that was there, and he was native to the continent, and he had lived this experience. So he had lived experience. And the gentleman who was the hired expert in the field, he was giving advice. And the gentleman with the lived experience said very little, and they were looking for elephants. And then there was a frustration that they could not find these elephants. And just out of the wild blue, the gentleman who had the lived experience, he said, "Over there, drive directly near the trees and you will find elephants." And so then there was a conversation that was had between the gentleman with lived experience versus the gentleman who had a scientific background, and he was just able to point out the subtle differences in the way that the grass had been growing, and that the way that the tree was hanging, which made absolutely no sense to the person who had a scientific background. It's just that he had seen these things over and over and over again, so he simply knew.
Yeah. All right, Cody. So Cody, you jump right in, then Larry will go.
Okay, then. Let's see. I don't want to take up too much time, but a lot I want to say. I think that I know this gets a lot into what I've talked about before about the conflation of the concepts of morphological phenotype and culture and behavior patterns when we use the term race. And I've seen that happen a lot during the conversation here, including with the example of the two women, Lucy and Maria Alamir. I heard about this 4 years ago. And to get on the topic of morphological phenotype, there's an example about the incomplete dominance of different genes and the relations of phenotypes. So the specific case of melanin, genes that regulate melanin have incomplete dominance. So if you have a parent with a allele that codes for more melanin, a parent with an allele that codes for lesser melanin, you'll have a child with a skin color that's a mixture between the two. And then if that child has another child with a person of similar background, then they'll have children who may be a mixture of different skin colors. This is the example we see in here. And it's also talks about the issue when trying to form the social identities based on morphological phenotypes, is that you're going to find people who don't fit quite into the neat boundaries that a lot of people hold to. I think Coach was also talking too about how there are also different morphological phenotypes used to racialize people other than skin color, and that can include hair texture, but also bone and tissue structures. So the flip, like how far apart the eyes are, the curve of the forehead, the curve of the nose. People will also look at those traits more to racialize people. I think that one of these girls, I know back in older times would have been referred to as an octoroon or a high yellow girl. There are different terminologies that have been used to racialize people throughout history and racialize people of mixed ancestry. So you then get into behavior and how that's used to define racial identity. I think, Steve, you were getting to that in your article and about the concept of race finding. You were saying that people are ostracized because they do not hold the beliefs or enact the behavior patterns that are assumed to be held by people within a racial group. And I think this gets to what I mentioned before about how race is a polyphyletic concept.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Griffin? Okay. This gets back to what I talked about before about race being a polyphyletic concept in which people believe or hold different definitions of what makes a person a member of a race or not, and that can include morphological phenotype, behavior patterns, ancestry, other things, and that not everybody keeps the same list of traits that they look for when trying to racialize someone. And too often, social conservatives who want to create a monophyletic or standardized definition of race ostracize those that they see as not befitting the neat definition that they want to form, and sometimes they'll be ostracized because they don't have the morphological phenotypes that they would like to define people of a certain race having, but also will do it when they do not enact the behaviors or hold the beliefs that they want to use to define a race. So I think that we need to talk more about how people define race and the concepts that people use when defining race, including culture and morphological phenotypes.
Well, I would argue the first thing that we have to do is we have to understand why we're putting such a value on that.
What value do you mean?
Well, the value of importance. Why would it be important?
Why is it important to racialize people?
Yeah.
You could ask different people that, and they'll probably give you different answers. I think the most common, though, is people, again, want a simple way of judging people, and the assumption that certain people with different physical appearances embody different behaviors, I think is one of the main reasons people uphold racial ideology. They just want a quick way of understanding if somebody is safe or respectable to be around.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the problem with racializing individuals is when we racialize them, we assume something that we do not have an objective knowledge of. So that's one of the reasons why I refuse to racialize people according to their skin color, is because once I do that, I immediately place upon them my own biases or my own concepts of societal structures on that person. And I don't want to do that. So I'm going to take them because we have plenty of racialized individuals in Facts Chamber, and they're all incredibly brilliant. Wolf is one of those. Unpopular is one of those. And both of those individuals are incredibly intelligent and incredibly insightful, even given the fact that they came from what many here would consider, black ghettos, right? Wolf is incredibly intelligent. And if I was to just simply dismiss him based off of racializing him as black, I think not only would I be harming him, I would also be harming my own self in many ways, where I am not giving myself the opportunity to get to know, meet, interact, and love him based on some pseudoistic idea of who I believe he should be, rather than giving him the grace of being who he wants to be seen as. So I understand what you're saying. What I'm saying is that I disagree with racializing people using subjective means, because I believe it's harmful for both parties involved. And this speaks to why racelining is such a damaging issue. And racelining really isn't just supposed to be intraracial. It can be interracial, right? So I can look at Charles and I can raceline him and say, well, because he's black and Nigerian, he doesn't understand, American culture, when someone outside the culture has a better perspective of what it looks like from the outside than those living within the construct of that society, right? So there's valuable insights that we can gain by looking outside of the concept and myth of race, and to not race-lined individuals based on those premises. And I'm sorry that we lost you, Cody. I always love hearing you and your brilliant mind. I mean, I love listening to you. And one thing I wanted to mention really quickly, there they are. Coach, I feel horribly, I feel horrible for the dumb individual that presumes for a moment that you do not belong everywhere you go. Because I know you at this point fairly well. I consider you a good friend, and I think anybody who doesn't allow you into a space based on the color of your skin, quite frankly, is a fucking idiot.
Well, thank you.
You're incredibly brilliant. You're incredibly insightful. You are thoughtful. You are respectful. You are loving, supportive, kind. You care about human beings. And if anybody looks at the color of your skin and doesn't know that about you by racializing, because that's what's going to happen, is they're going to racialize you. That means they're going to miss all those wonderful things that I got to know you as, and it's their loss. I mean, obviously you're going to lose something from it too, because you belong in that space. But when I look at it in those terms, I'm like, I feel bad for the idiot that is not allowing you into that space far more than I feel bad for you, because if that's the kind of space that you're going to inhabit and you're going to have to come up against that kind of BS, quite frankly, is I would much rather you safe and exploring different avenues than to have to exist within a space that doesn't accept you as the exact person and more than what I described earlier. I think it's advantageous for them to decease and desist these really ridiculous ideas of who you are and the depth of your human character, because they decided to racialize you. So I just wanted to let you know that I love you and I respect you and I hear you and I value your opinion immensely.
You know what? I am smiling from ear to ear, and I appreciate that. This is a thought to consider. What if some of the most elevated places are reserved for people who don't look like me?
Then we need to destroy that construct. Absolutely.
So what I will tell you is some of the most elevated places are reserved for people who don't look like me. And then something just this simple as cooperation is reserved for people who don't look like me. And I get that. And later I will play for you. It's a very simple thing. Remember we were working on the Bearded Men's Challenge?
Yeah.
Bearded Mug Challenge anyway. I had asked someone who was of a high level to participate in the challenge. And it was just very funny how it happened. I called him, yada, yada, yada. He agreed. And then I went to thank him for doing so on his podcast. Mind you, he didn't know what I looked like. He only knew what I sounded like. And so live on air, he goes, "Oh, I didn't know you were black. And the problem occurred because he forgot to racialize me because we were talking on the phone. So he didn't know that I was black. But because I showed up like my little avatar in his chat, well, now he's able to see I was black. And so it is very interesting and kind of funny to me that I get to see him process the fact that I am black live in living color. I get to see the light in his eyes. Right. And it's recorded. Like I can see these things in like life, but I generally don't get to record them. It was so interesting to me. He goes on to say, "Oh, I'd be happy to, work with you in the future, yada yada yada." But the point is, he had that moment. Ta-da!
Yeah.
She's black. Oh,
Yeah. Hopefully that gave him an opportunity to deracialize his own biases. I hope he took that as an opportunity to do that.
I will tell you. Typically, what I experience is that, oh, she's a good black person. So people don't typically deracialize all black people. They count me as one of the good ones, so they categorize me as a good black person versus the kind that they have in their head.
Yeah. Why not just categorize someone as a good person? I don't,
Because they don't want to let go of previous stereotypes and basically long held concepts and traditions. And so this is not something that's going to happen all at once. Perhaps Generation Z will do a really good job at it, and the generation after them may be extremely phenomenal at it. But where we're living in the place that we're living and understanding things today is certainly very a very heavy load.
Well, yeah, and I agree with you 100% in that sense that I hope that we get to that place. I'm of the mind of Dr. Mason and Dr. Carter, Dr. Jacoby Carter, where I have no problem with the institution of whiteness being the first to go.
Mm-hmm.
I think the idea of whiteness should be the first to be abolished in the process of racelessness, because I don't see the value of it. I don't see the value in being, in this construct of whiteness, because I'm constantly in these rooms like I am right now. I'm the only white racialized person. So I don't see why that matters, because every single person in here has, a brilliant mind, and probably more brilliant than my own. So the idea that I should have a higher position than everybody here based on the color of my skin seems like an absolutely ridiculous proposition that I hope nobody is actually doing, including myself, because it's silly. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. I do not think white is necessarily a race, even though in America we certainly use it as if it's a race. Um, I think people have backgrounds like, you can be Scottish, you can be, Italian, you can be Irish, you can be English, things of that nature. I'll tell you what I struggle with is race or an ethnic group as a foundational Black American or an American descendant of slaves, and that is my homeland is America, being that everything else was erased. And there is not necessarily a purity per se in the place where my people come from. So, in that, I do see foundational Black Americans as a ethnic group. I see us as an ethnic group that is both newly forming and disappearing at the same time. So it's a very unique circumstance, and I think maybe in 200 years might not even exist in a significant way. So it's an
Yeah.
issue that we have to deal with in the here and now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope
Completely
so.
agree.
See, I wish that millennials hadn't dropped the ball on trying to give up ideas of race and racism, but sadly that seems to be the case in my generation. I thought that shit would have ended with our generation because we grew up on like shows like the Magic School Bus and the Puzzle Place, and which there were like interracial friend groups all got along. But sadly, it seems like too many millennials didn't learn from the example that I took art.
Yeah.
Well,
Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead,
I
Coach
was
Love.
just going to say race matters because it matters.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's let Larry have his say. He's been at the back for quite a while.
Witness,
So Larry,
Larry.
welcome to the
Witness.
conversation.
Thank you, Larry.
Hi, greetings, Steve. Greetings, Coach Love. Greetings, Cody. Greetings, Charles.
Good to hear your voice.
Thanks. I won't take up much of your time. It was a very complicated subject, actually. And you guys, you did a very good job handling it. I mean, I was really confused listening to it. I just feel the whole problem with racialization, it's going to be difficult not to implement it if you're living in a society that's been based on it for so long. And the examples that each of you gave from Coach Love telling us about the guy on the phone who forgot to racialize and then decided to use it, to you, Steve, choosing not to do that. It's like you're almost in a losing battle because you're in a society where so many of your peers are implementing it. And I think I would love to live in a country where it wasn't being used, but I would say a country like America, where it was founded on that, from the moment Columbus started committing all these atrocities in the Caribbean. I mean, it's a losing battle. It's like you're going to have to find a way to be successful using it. And plus, there are minorities who feel that they've been oppressed, and they have to implement racialization to somehow even the playing field. You know, whether people talk about affirmative action, which is a completely different subject, which brings up a lot of arguments to, you know, people talking about reparations and people receiving reparations from Jews, Jewish Americans to Japanese Americans and Native Americans. So the whole race lining, as you've used, I think, unfortunately, it's a necessary part of the politics in America. You can't get rid of it. Maybe not in our lifetime anyway. So that's where I feel you can't get rid of it, which is a shame because I hate it, but that's what.
Yeah. Well, you know, sorry, I keep getting something in my eye, but, you know, to speak to what you're saying is, you know, I absolutely understand where you're coming from, where we've lived within this structure for so long that it's now a part of our culture, right? It's a part of Western society. But the problem that I run into is that when we're trying to destroy and tear down the ideologies that allow white supremacy to exist and persist and to continue, you know, we can't continue using the same system to tear it down. And so, yeah, while it may be true, and I happen to agree with you that it is true that we're still using these constructs of race that began in the 1500s and was used by Europeans to excuse and to promote the slavery of racialized black individuals from Africa, and the enslavement, rape, killing, murder, all the horrible things that we did to them throughout history. We can't continue to use the same ideas. You know what I mean? Because if we continue to use the same ideas, we should not expect a different outcome than we've already got. And we can see that playing out. We're not seeing a change. We're not seeing a difference. We're not. I mean, we can see to some degree that racial relations have started to get better, and they're infinitely better than they were than compared to the 1950s or the 1920s, and, you know, during Jim Crow era. stuff like that, we can see that racial relations are definitely getting better, right? But I think the reason why is that slowly as a society we've began to deracialize ourselves to some degree. Martin Luther King did a phenomenal job at doing that, making us look inside, making us look at the character, and instead of focusing so much on the skin, right? And Karen and what were the names? Karen and Barbara Fields and their book Racecraft, which I recommend everybody read. They definitely address these issues where when we continue to use this structure of race itself, we create this kind of illusion, this magic trick that for some reason race on its own at its base matters, right? But we know scientifically and we know physically that is just, it's simply untrue, that it should make any perceivable difference in our society when trying to place a higher or lower value on groups of people, right? We tend to say, well, here's a good example, right? Let's say you take a racialized white person, a racialized black person, they're both in jail for violence, right? We automatically know that there's a disparity between the sentencing between the racialized white and the racialized black. Even if it was their first time, everything was identical about those two cases. We know that there's a disparity between those two people and how much prison time they're going to serve, right? But if we just kind of, let's just push that to the side for a second and we just look at the behavior, right? We look at the racialized white and the racialized black person. We tend to conflate race with the behavior. And that, I think, is probably one of the most problematic ways of looking at these things, when we should be focused on the behavior and not the person necessarily and what they identify as, because it's the behavior, it's the violence that's hurting people, not the skin color.
Yeah, I think that's what you're trying to get to with your term redlining in your article, right? About the conflation of
RACELINING,
racial identity with behavior.
Right, we're RACELINING people, so we're conflating skin color with ideas, beliefs, behaviors, and cultures, when really we shouldn't be doing that. We should be embracing those different cultures, those different ideas, and looking at it from the position where we can begin to collectively move past this unnecessary requirement to look at skin color versus continuing to look at skin color and expecting a different, result. I mean, this is basically the definition of insanity, right? Doing things more than once and expecting a different result is the definition of both love and insanity, right?
I make the same point in a different way, in that people need to stop conflating morphological phenotypes with behavior patterns. They need to see that like assumption that was codified in pseudosciences like phrenology, where people with different skull shapes were assumed to be prone to different personality traits. That's something that's continued in the culture and continued in racial ideologies, where if you have a certain skin color or other physical traits, you're assumed to believe certain things and to behave certain ways and to engage in different cultural practices. And we need to
Blumenbach and Meyer.
Yeah.
Blumenbach and Meyer.
Yeah, we need to understand that morphological phenotypes are not correlated to behavior patterns, whether socialized or hardwired.
Right. Well, and the best example of how this all went wrong is with Blumenbach and Meyer, right? They used phrenology, the bumps on your head and the shape of your head, to determine inferiority and superiority, right? They literally used only physical attributes and only this construct of race, and mended the two, but they conflated so many things within that, that science, which we now know is pseudoscience, because we know that the bumps on your head do not correlate with anything about who you are, right? Yeah. So if that is something that is physical, right, yet we know does not have any outstanding interaction with IQ, love, any of these different, characteristics, then why are we not applying the same logic to skin color itself and saying, well, skin color is no different than phrenology, because we know for a fact that it does not have an effect in the outcome of IQ, of compassion, in none of these things, right?
Yeah.
So it seems
back to the thing of what I talk about correlations. We need to understand that. See, we need to stop correlating physical appearance with behavior patterns, because it should be understood there is no causal relationship. And
right.
I've been trying to think of other terminology in order to better explain what I mean. And I think the term pathologize works well, because from what I understand, racial identity has been pathologized throughout the generations. Pathologizing means to regard or treat someone or something as psychologically abnormal or unhealthy. And that was the case with phrenology, where people who were regarded as different races were considered mentally inferior or mentally unhealthy. And that also goes with cultural concepts of race, in which people who engage in different behavior patterns or cultural behaviors are considered unhealthy or abnormal. And so people need to understand to stop pathologizing racial identity.
Absolutely. And I think, Larry, to answer your question better, I think I did a kind of a piss poor job at it, and I apologize. It kind of goes back to the idea that if you don't make a change, you'll never see a change. And I think if we're going to start creating the society that we want to see, which is anti-race, right? We're looking for an anti-racist society through abolishing race. Then we have to start exhibiting some kind of communal support for that idea, in the sense that, I just applied for a refinance on my house, right? And obviously they're going to ask me what my race is. I stopped putting race on any of my paperwork. I will not put it on my paperwork. It's really unfortunate it's unfortunate when they force me to, because then I have to. But then I think about it, it's like, why is that important? Like, do I not deserve this based on my credit? You know what I mean? But I've stopped putting race on all of my federal forms, all of my state forms, all of my applications. I won't put race on there anymore. And I specifically make sure that I am behaving in alignment with those morals and values, because I want to elicit a change. If I can affect 5 people around me, those 5 are going to affect 20. You know what I mean? And so I think the best argument I can make for that is that, yes, we do live in the society that you're describing, but the reply I would give you is, no, we don't have to. And that change starts obviously with us.
True. I would agree with that. But out of curiosity, have you considered that maybe there are people within, say, America, who've come to the conclusion that they will never achieve the anti-racist society that you're talking about? So they've now decided, I'm going to live in this society, but I'm going to see how I can get mine, how I can do for self or my kind. Since this society, they've already come to the conclusion that the society will not change. And if it does, it will give the appearance of changing, but subtly, race lining will still be there subtly. So they've decided, look, it's not going to change. Let me see how I can use this race system to benefit my race. They've come to that conclusion. They've just accepted it's never going to go away. So they're like, let me just do what I can, look for my own people, get my own people reparations, segregate, and go out and live out in some 30-acre land, which is not a far-fetched thing in America, because you do know it's not against the law for you to buy some land and then you take a whole group of people and then you go and create your own little kingdom there. And of course, from time to time, you'll end up like Waco, Texas, and ATF will turn up and shut you down. But I guess I'm saying there are people in certain parts of the world, like America, but they've come to that conclusion. It'll never go away. They might not even want it to go away. They might actually like it. So they've decided, we're going to do what we can within the system to empower ourselves using race lining. I know it's a crazy thing, but there are people who are like saying, we're going to use race lining to benefit ourselves. And I think a lot of people like that exist in America. You know,
I've heard a lot of people use that language that convinces me they think that way.
White supremacy has been doing it for well over 400 years.
Bingo.
You know what I mean? And I think the best best answer I have to that is I firmly believe that eventually either they will fail or their minds will be changed. But I can't say that those people don't exist, because I fully believe you. I believe they exist. I believe they believe it's better to live within that construct, and that makes me, admittedly, that makes me a little bit sad. But in the end, there's nothing that I can do to change them or change their minds. But what I can do is I can elicit the change. I can elicit the behavior for the change that I want to see by changing myself and continuing with that belief system. And hopefully someday when we get enough behind us, and we have enough numbers of people that believe this and behave as if it's true, we will eventually elicit we will eventually come to critical mass, and we will eventually be able to abolish this as a majority opinion. This idea of race, we'll be able to finally abolish that as the major construct to live within, and we can tear it down to a more minority perspective, where we may at that point actually live to see a truly post-racial society.
I hope that happens. I really do.
Fuck, I do too, man.
Yeah.
I do too.
I don't think it'll happen in my lifetime, but I hope it happens. I could be
the
wrong.
The work that we do now is, our children are going to build off of our work. You know what I mean? And that's going to continue. And so if we want to elicit a change that our great grandchildren don't have to deal with these same issues, we have to start now rather than in the next generation, so that by the time they get to our great grandchildren, our grandchildren finish the work that we started. I mean, this is incredibly obvious when you look at the state of racial relations, slavery, Jim Crow, the Civil Rights Act, or the Civil Rights era, and now we're moving into today, where LGBTQ rights are definitely a concern. But now you don't find people who identify as gay or lesbian being beat up at the same rate they were in the 80s. So we're making these small incremental moves forward, because I believe the ideas that we live by of liberty, fraternity, all of these different ideas are finally starting to grab hold within the greater majority of our community and of our society, and it's actually starting to work. So if we act now, and we start enacting these ideas now, and start realizing that racelining is a real thing and that it has very definite harmful effects, and we work to erase these, or to destroy these constructs to the point where racelining is no longer a needed term in our vocabulary, then I can't argue against doing that. I think it's a necessary step forward, and hopefully it's a leap forward, right? Especially since I'm a follower of Dr. Mason. I believe in her. I believe in her ideas, and I believe in her facts and her truths. And I believe in people like Coach Love, and I believe in people like Charles, and people like you, and people like Cody.
Is that's an interesting thing you mentioned, Coach Love. What is Coach Love's opinion? Does she believe, like, because there's a lot of trauma from people who are still part of this whole race lining thing to get their compensation, reparations, or whatever. So for them to go down your path, they would then have to forsake or forego their reparations. I don't think they'd want to do that. I could be wrong. Maybe Coach Love would know.
I don't know.
So I've actually had this conversation with Steve, and really kind of pushed the envelope with them. And basically what he has given me is this answer: just because we let go of race does not mean that we let go of the concept that people have been racialized. That said, I haven't seen that really echoed and on the front lines of Dr. Mason's work. And if we're going to let go of the idea of race, we have to be sure not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, because when you say you don't see color, yet I have been penalized because of my color, then you forget to make corrections because of my color.
Right.
And so that is that is very important. And I think it goes to what Annan is saying in the comments regarding things related to affirmative action. Because if all of a sudden we are believed to be on a level playing field, yet I have still been left behind because of things that are having to do with my race, then we are glossing over the issue that has occurred in the first place. I know you're dying to say something. And so I'll go ahead and let you speak, but I do want it to come back to me.
Yep, I've
Yeah.
got my own response too.
Yeah, so the theory of racelessness often gets confused or conflated with color blindness, which it is not. Color blindness takes the position that slavery's over, anything that's ever happened to you doesn't matter anymore because that was in the past, now is the future. I'm not going to judge you by your skin color, but I'm also not going to acknowledge the things that have happened to people like you and people who look like you in the past. That is not what the theory of racelessness does. What the theory of racelessness does is it allows us the opportunity to step out. Excuse me. It allows us the opportunity to step outside of race and view these things from a constructive and objective position where we can see that racism happened. We can see that it continues to happen. We can continue to see the effects of those, but we're not working within inside the construct anymore. So we can actually view these things objectively, and we can find ways to not only to help, but also find ways to start beginning to deconstruct these systems that have been put in place to both control us and subjugate us, but also to start building ways in which we can lift people up that have been traditionally and historically systemically oppressed. So there's a vast difference between those two ideologies, because I can see that your skin color is brown. I'm not blind by any means, but I'm not going to racialize you to fit my comfort level of what I think a black person should be. Therefore, I use the terminology racialized as almost as an action to acknowledge that it should not be an issue, or it should not be something that should be happening. We should not be racializing you. We also acknowledge that that we stand outside of the construct of race. And to answer Anon, there's many ways that we could actually fix a lot of these problems. And I see your comment that not marking my race can benefit me. I can understand your position on that, although I'm going to disagree with it, because if it's you would have to tell me how it is going to benefit me first and foremost. But second of all, if we look at affirmative action, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get underprivileged people's opportunities. Well, we can do that in multiple ways. One of those things is we can look at income, right? If we look at income, family income, a history of family income, right? So if your family is traditionally poor and has been for forever, we can look at that and we can say, we're going to help you. We're going to help you. We're going to get you an education. We're going to teach you about, credit, how to buy a house, all these different other things. We're going to teach you how to do these things correctly so that you can be successful, rather than taking something that doesn't actually belong to those, which is race. I want to focus on the behavior rather than the thing that we're putting that we're conflating with the behavior, which is race, right? We want to focus on the actual thing that's actually the problem, and that is the historical subjugation and oppression of racialized black folk, and the result of that being living in poverty in some locations, in disparities in incarceration, right? Actually addressing the issue rather than using race as a blanket or a Band-Aid, which I believe that we did during the civil rights era, is that we didn't actually address the problem of race, right? We just put a Band-Aid over it, and those Band-Aids were laws, We never actually address the racism that is pernicious within the systems that we work and reside within. We should have been working to deconstruct race at that point in time, and that would have solved and been a complement to the civil rights era. So in those kind of aspects, and I'm no economist, obviously, but because I stand outside of the construct of race, I can see that the issue isn't actually race. The issue is the outcomes that race has been used to create.
So I want to jump in here and I want to talk about number one, Annan's suggestion of putting together an affirmative action program that specifically elevates American descendants of slaves. That is not necessarily based off of someone who is financially disadvantaged. That is based off of someone who has a lack of access to opportunity because they are a descendant of a slave, which is very, very different. So maybe they're not financially impoverished, but because of being a American descendant of a slave, they have a lack of access to opportunity because they are not in the proper social group. Okay, that is a very different challenge. And what I would honestly like to see Dr. Mason do, what I think is the greatest weakness in her positioning or selling of her theory, is that she does not readily speak to how she corrects the issue of being racialized as less than, as your skin color having a different currency. So, and then your skin color and your currency, your social currency having a different value to it. So, as a foundational Black woman, I have less currency than if I had a posh accent. If I call someone with a posh accent and tell people that I'm not American, but yes, I'm Black, I can get a little more. Or I can just sound like a white woman and I can get a little more. But my currency changes based off of who people think I am. And so what I'm telling you is, as a foundational Black American, I don't have the same currency, or better yet, I have a less currency than other people who might look exactly like me. So if I'm of Nigerian culture, I might be considered, or Caribbean culture, even though my skin color is the same, because of my culture, I'm considered to be of higher value. So it gets very specific. Your value as a human being, it gets very, very specific. And I would like to see Dr. Mason improve on how she voices the solutions to that. I would like to see her get good at that, because I think that is the thing that causes her idea to lose power and functionality.
I see what you're saying, and I think she has actually addressed that. But I think that's probably for another time. And I'm still going to try and set up an interview between you and Dr. Mason at some point in time. But yeah, Charles, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I think we'll have to draw this conversation to a close. Interesting as it may be, and so we have like 6 minutes more to draw it to a close.
Yeah.
So,
can I say what I've been wanting to say?
Yeah, so Vanara, you go, Ellery go, Coach Love, then Steve will end for us.
Yeah,
So go ahead.
See, when talking about accents, I think you're talking about the concept that I learned about a while ago called stereotype boost, in which there exist positive stereotypes and people can sometimes use their advantage, and then stereotype threat, negative stereotypes that often hurt people. So I think that is a topic that should be talked about more. Also, with the topic about affirmative action reparations, my response would be people in need should be given the help they need, regardless of the reason that they're in need. And see, I think that when people talk about affirmative action and talk about the reasons why different racialized groups of people, suffer from different issues, they try to talk about issues such as slavery in order to justify people deserving reparations. And in my mind, that's pointless. People should be given what they need, regardless of whether other people think they deserve it or not. Because in my life, I've seen many people try to claim that others don't deserve what they need for some arbitrary reason or another. So, in my mind, whether or not somebody deserves help is, pointless, because whether or not the concept of deserving something is relative to other people's judgment, but whether, what some people need, that's generally something that people can more easily agree on. So again, people should be given what they need, regardless of whether others think that they deserve it or not. And I wanted to get more into things too with you, Coach Love. Like, I was curious if you had listened to the last podcast that we had done, where I talked about double consciousness and the looking glass self, and I was curious about your own insights about how people racialized you and the stereotypes that they projected on you, and how that made you feel. Because I also wanted to get into about just the issues that come when people have stereotypes projected onto them. And I think that the concept a lot of people are more familiar with is gender dysphoria, where people feel unease about how they are gendered and the gender stereotypes projected onto them. And I'm not sure if anybody has coined the term yet, but I think racial dysphoria might be appropriate too, where people feel unease about the racial stereotypes that are projected upon them, and about the psychological issues that can come about because of that.
So you said a lot there, but I'll give you some direct answers. I do believe that I missed the very last episode, and so I'll have to go back and see that. I believe I saw the episode prior to that. So I'll do my homework on that, and then we'll just have to have a conversation. Maybe we can have a chat in a social forum, or we can just, connect on Discord.
Okay.
All right, so Larry, go.
I have nothing to say. I just wanted to. I wanted to hear really what Coach Love was going to say, because she is based in America, and she is part of a group that has experienced prejudice. I'm not part of that group. I'm over in Britain, so we have our own problems, but they have their problems. Black Americans do. So the whole thing that you mentioned is interesting. You can't ignore it. And that's why I said, the RACELINING, the racial factor is part of the system. Maybe the system isn't meant to change. Maybe the system was designed not to change. They were always meant to be people who are oppressed. And I just wanted to quickly read this out. This was from Martin Luther King Jr., because he was mentioned earlier. It says here from him, until we commit ourselves to ensuring that the underclass is given justice and opportunity, we will continue to perpetuate the anger and violence that tears the soul of this nation. I fear I am integrating my people into a burning house. So from a class perspective, he's mentioning the underclass until justice is given. So justice isn't being given. And then he's mentioned his people. I'm guessing Black Americans. He feels he's put them into a burning house, and that burning house is America. And the system, maybe that system was designed deliberately like that. It wasn't meant to get any better, which is why people are forced to do what they're doing now. They've accepted their fate under the whole racial rules. So they're like, let's see what we can do to benefit our race, because the system isn't meant to change. They're just meant to be oppressed. That's what I think. I know it's depressing. I'm sorry, but that's what I think.
No, O'Leary, I think that you'll see probably RACELINING if you look at the UK's history, such as the RACELINING that I've read about between upper class and lower class Britons, in which lower class Britons were often racialized and assumed to be of lesser intelligence or ability. And there's also cases of that in the United States as well, with the term white trash, in which people are racialized as white, but who do not embody the positive stereotypes assumed to come with whiteness are called trash because they may embody behaviors common to African Americans. I've seen that happen a lot. So yeah, Steve, his point about white supremacy using racelining, as he calls it, for centuries is very true. And Steve, if I were to create a definition for the term racelining, tell me if you think this works. The stigmatization of people who may be racialized into a group based on morphological phenotype, but who do not subscribe to behavioral stereotypes associated with that racial group.
There has to be a discrimination aspect in there.
Okay.
But let's talk about that, because I think a definition would be useful. But I will, when we get off of here, let's talk about that, because I'm really interested in that.
Okay.
I just wanted to say to all of you, I have to go. Thank you, Charles. Pleasure talking to you, Steve. Pleasure talking to you, Coach Love. Cody, pleasure. I will speak to you all for the next show. Take care.
Thank you so much, Larry. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
To speak to what Larry said, and this is kind of, the thing that's the bummer about it really is that, the white supremacist view of race, it was designed to keep one aspect of society above the other, right? That was the entire concept and purpose behind creating modern race as we know it today. That was the purpose. And that is a further argument for the theory of racelessness, in the sense that when we continuously see the outcomes of supporting a system that was created and supports white supremacy, why are we surprised when we don't see a different outcome? So why continue to play the game? I don't want to play that game anymore. I'm not going to play the game anymore. And even more so to the point, I'm not going to live, first and foremost, behind a lie, which race, in any other way that you want to put it, is a lie. It forces us to try to admit that something exists that does not, and it forces us to associate and conflate characteristics that are not consistent with those beliefs as well. And I don't want to live to that lie anymore, and so I'm not going to. So I'm not going to practice that. However, I think that when we look at perspectives like this, and I think, Coach Love, you brought up a really good point, and I don't want to sound argumentative. That's not my goal, because I acknowledge what you're saying, and I do acknowledge that there is a problem with people seeing you and racializing you and subtracting some of your social capital based solely on that perspective. And that's kind of why I'm doing this. This is why I'm talking about this. I'm telling people this is wrong to do. You should not be doing that. You should not be racializing someone and associating your racialized perspectives about who that person is and subtracting that social capital purely based off of a characteristic that we can all see, but nobody really understands why we're putting such a lower value on that, when we know the value of you as a woman and as a racialized Black woman is no different than that of a racialized white woman. We know that you're intelligent. We know that you belong in every space that you walk into. The problem is the behavior of the people that are telling you otherwise. And for someone who is raceless like myself, I refuse to be put in that position, and I refuse to play by those rules. I belong where I belong, if the people there believe I do or don't. And if they choose to not have me in that space, that's their choice, but it's their loss. And that's why I think anywhere that you go and someone does that, they're losing a significant resource, a massive boost to everything within that group, including the character, the integrity that you bring with it, or bring with yourself. And it's unfortunate, but it is their loss. It's their loss if they want to play that game. I'm not going to. So anywhere I go and you come in, I'm going to make sure that I fight for your right to be there, because I believe in you as a human being and as a person, and all the struggles that you've gone through in your life, because we've talked about this, and we've talked about the circumstances where racism played a role in your life. And it was hard for me to hear those things, and it still continues to be hard to hear those things, right? Because they're ugly. They're ugly things that should not exist, but they're a reality that you have to live with every single day. When you go out into the world, you're faced with that threat every single time you go out there. And what I want to do is I want to eventually eliminate that threat. I don't want you to have to face that threat anymore, because the problem isn't you. The problem isn't your skin color. The problem is the behavior of other people that are placing those things and those expectations and those beliefs on you because of that. And so that's really the purpose of RACELINING, is to get people to start to think and realize that the way that we separate people by this fallacy of race is a horrible idea. It's not conducive with positive outcomes. And to acknowledge when it happens in the way that, if someone says, hey, because you're white, you have less of a say here because your ideas are inferior. We all know that statement is untrue. The idea is what matters, not the skin color, not the person. The idea is what matters. And when you try to use race as a means of subjugating or oppressing even people of your own, racial demographic, it's incredibly harmful to the entire cause of moving humanity forward. And that's more or less what I was getting from what I was trying to write about in that book. Was I was tired of seeing people like you, Coach Love, who are being discriminated against, by people who belong to your racial group, saying that you don't belong there, or you talk white, or because I find those things just another way of supporting a white supremacist system that we should be working mutually together to destroy and to tear down. But unfortunately, those people choose to live within that structure. And by doing so, they're actually repairing the building. They're actually using the tools that the master used to build the house to continue to repair it. And even in some cases, adding floors to it. And I want to work against that. I want to tear it down. But to do so, I believe that we have to step outside the concept and constructs of race and white supremacy to do that. So,
all right. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on, Charles. I really appreciate the opportunity. Coach Love, thank you for pushing those perspectives, and Venera, thank you for adding your voice to this. I always appreciate your abundant intelligence and the way that you look at things. And Charles, I got no shortage of good things to say about you.
Thank you, Steve. So, Coach Love, you go there. Mr. Pelu will close for us.
I want to say something that is not going to throw us off into another line of conversation, but I think it is important that I acknowledge this. Because skin color and sexuality has currency, other people recognize that. So perhaps people within the same race as I am may choose not to work with me or select me for a particular position, not necessarily because of my skin color, but because of the access they believe someone with my skin color has. A good example of that is when you hire a white person to represent you in a transaction so that you can get access to the very best that there is. And you're not necessarily race lining, you're just understanding that racism, being racialized, exists, and you're giving yourself the very best opportunity to get access to what is desired.
I think that's a great topic to explore further. Absolutely. Because I would love to explore that further with you. Because I do believe that you're correct in the sense where that might be a place where I am short-sighted.
All right. So, Mr. Pilu.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me today. Yeah, thanks for having me today. Yeah, I didn't get to catch much of the thing because I was visiting a friend of mine. I was visiting an elder, and I couldn't catch it. I'm still over visiting him, but in terms of race, I want to piggyback on what Coach Love said. I, uh, um, I understand why people might want to get rid of this race, but as long as it has currency, as long as it's there, and as long as we feel the effects of it, we have to be situationally aware. So, my thing is always know your situation, know where you at, know your life. So, to me, race has always been a situation awareness. Like, I know I'm black because I know the situation I'm in by being a black man, and I don't want to lose sight of my situation, because if you lose sight of your situation, you can find yourself out of position in a dangerous spot. So, racial consciousness is going to be there until it's going to be there until it's not. So it's a lot more to talk about this issue. We've talked about it many times, with the theory of racistness and all these things like that. But as long as the situation presents itself, you have to you basically have to take due notice and govern yourself accordingly. And with that said, that's all I have to say. One last thing is that please, tomorrow at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time, USA, we have a special show with yours truly, Coach Love, and myself. We have Blood Brothers War for Ukraine. Come check it out. We're gonna have experts come break down what's going on in Ukraine. It's gonna be a phenomenal show. Come check it out on Coach Love's channel. Coach Love is right here on her channel. We're gonna have it tomorrow. Be there or be square. Thank you very much, everybody.
I love it.
Thank
I
you,
love
Mr.
it. I love it. And I hate to add one more thing, but I think this is good for everyone to know. When you are of the dominant or majority race, it is very difficult for you to see racism. And I think that is why Charles and Steve kind of struggle a little bit of it, because where Charles is, he sees mostly people who look like him and are of his culture, so to speak. And in America, the majority culture or the dominant race is white. And so when you are not of a minority position, it is difficult for you to really see the effects of constantly being racialized.
All right. Thank you very much, Coach Love. Yeah, I think I understand where you're coming from with that. It's very possible that based on where I am, I may not be able to understand some of those nuances. Yeah. So, for the conversation today, I really don't have much to say. You guys have done an excellent job with it. But I think that as regards race lining, my position is ideas should be tested and people should not be barred from within their racialized group just because they have an unorthodox view regarding certain situations. You understand? So while we can hash out our ideas and say this idea is a good idea, this is a bad idea, it is not proper to say because you're not thinking this way, you are not black, or because you're not thinking this way, you're not white, or you're not. So it just creates so much more division. You understand? That's my sense. So I want to say thank you very much, Steve. Your article was a inspiration for this talk today. Thank you very much, Coach Love. Coach Love, the thing you opened up my mind to another aspect of affirmative action that I may not have understood. And I would really want to explore that more with you. So maybe in another time, maybe next week or so, we can set up a show and we can just talk about affirmative action. And I think you have a lot to bring on that aspect, because with me, I don't want to be right. I want to learn. I want to improve. So if I see superior knowledge, or I'm very open to changing my mind, which is what I want to do. So I want people, smart people, to come and educate me on these issues, so that when I'm talking, I know exactly what I'm talking about. And Cody, thank you very much as well. Mr. Pelu, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'll try and catch the show tomorrow.
Hey,
Go
drop
ahead,
the
Mr.
link. I put the link in the back, so drop the link, please. Thank you, Charles, so much.
Okay, so let me just copy the link and drop it. So I'll try and catch the show tomorrow. If I can't catch it live, I'll definitely watch the replay. Yeah, so the link is in the chat here. So guys, just go click on it, and then you just set reminder so that it reminds you when the show starts tomorrow. Yeah, so that will be all for tonight. So thank you guys for coming, and I'll catch you in another live stream. It's bye for now.
Bye bye for now. Thank you.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Bye bye, everybody. Thanks, everybody.
Bye bye.